Did you know that Mary Magdalene was apostle to the apostles? Well, why is she known as that? Well, you got to get a copy of the recent book by Jennifer McNutt, The Mary We Forgot, What the Apostle to the Apostles Teaches the Church Today, published by BrazosPress. Hi, everybody. I'm David Capes, Director of the Academic Programming at Lanier Theological Library and Learning Center in Houston, Texas. This is the Stone Chapel Podcast. Glad you're with us. The Stone Chapel Podcast is part of the Church Leaders Podcast Network. We are dedicated to providing resources for churches, church leaders, and their teams to help them navigate the difficult cultural waters we are currently in. You can learn more about that at ChurchLeaders.com/podcast network. Jennifer Powell McNutt is our guest today. She's written an important book about one of Jesus's female disciples, Mary Magdalene. I got to know Jennifer when I was dean of the School of Biblical Theological Studies at Wheaton College a few years ago. She's an outstanding member of the faculty. She's a historian by training, and so she engages in deep dives into questions and issues. This one, Mary Magdalene and her significance in the early church, through 2,000 years of church history, and ultimately to her significance today. There are a lot of rumors and innuendos surrounding Mary Magdalene. Many of those are false, and they need to be debunked historically. So today, the truth about Mary Magdalene, apostle to the apostles, with Jennifer Powell McNutt on the Stone Chapel Podcast.
I'm Dr. Jennifer Powell McNutt, and I'm the Franklin S. Dearness Professor of Biblical and Theological Studies at Wheaton College.
Dr. Jennifer McNutt. Jennifer, good to see you. Welcome to the Stone Chapel Podcast. Your first appearance.
Finally, yay!
It took like 2 years for us to be able to do
It really
this.
did.
You know, we kept missing each other and
I know.
kids and travel and work and all this kind of things. And you're a busy lady.
Yeah, so I've been told.
Yeah. Well, in a minute, we're going to talk about your book, The Mary We Forgot. And the subtitle is fascinating. We're going to talk about that. What the apostle to the apostles teaches the church today. It's really fascinating. Learned a lot just by reading the book, and a lot of things I didn't know about Mary Magdalene and her significance and her ongoing potential significance, I think, in the church today. So, all right, for those who don't know, who is Jennifer Powell McNutt?
Well, I'll start with my teaching. I teach at Wheaton College in the Litvin Divinity School, and I run the master's programs in theology and history of Christianity. You and I have worked together, so that's delightful. And my husband and I are from California originally. I went to Westmont College and Princeton Theological Seminary, and then the University of St. Andrews. And I'm married to David McNutt, and he is the senior acquisitions editor in theology at Zondervan. And we have McNutt Show Ministries. We love to work together and to do ministry together in our Presbyterian tradition, and we wrote a book together too recently.
Well, you're an author. I mean, you do a lot of things, and you travel and you speak all over the place. McNutt Shell Ministries. We'll put a link in the show notes about that. That's kind of really interesting, to hear about.
Yes, yeah.
I want to learn more about that sometime.
Bridging the church and the academy. So.
Oh, that's what we do at the Lanier Theological Library. That is our mission. That's what we're trying to do, and that's a little bit of a heavy lift at times. But at other times, it seems like these days, at least, it's working hand in glove.
You guys are doing great work.
Well, we got to get you down here sometime to be one of our speakers and teachers, and maybe we'll even bring David too. Who knows?
Oh, good. Please do.
We're talking about your book, The Mary We Forgot, What the Apostle to the Apostle Teaches the Church Today. And all I have is a promotional copy. So I am right now demanding a signed copy by you to be sent my way. All right, I want your name on it, but I'll have the full version at that point. I'm not sure what's left out of some of these promotional versions. All right, let's talk a little bit about the fact that you have done a lot of work in Reformation studies, and now all of a sudden you're kind of heading back to the early church and that tradition in a way. What was the impetus for you to move from a focus on a little bit later in church history back to the beginnings?
Well, for this book, it was really just tracing the history of Mary Magdalene's interpretation. And also not only across time, but also across the different traditions and branches of the church. So I'm looking at the Roman Catholic, the Eastern Orthodox, and the Protestant, but of course, writing from a Protestant perspective
Mhm.
and experience of her. And so we have to go back to the beginning to see these early interpreters and how they are addressing Mary Magdalene, how they're highlighting her role, what they're thinking about exegetically and theologically about her presence, and then how that eventually gets us to the point where we are today is
Mm,
really what I was hoping to see.
mm,
And of course, there were surprises along the way, and there were other things that we will be familiar with, especially this idea of her as a prostitute,
right.
which, is, I think, very well known in our modern popular cultural world. Kind of seeing how that happened, but then also some of the complexity behind the reading of her importance and significance and role
Mm.
in the Christian life.
Well, you begin with Jesus Christ Superstar, and
Yeah.
any book that begins with Jesus Christ Superstar is going to get my attention. I'm telling you.
Okay, good.
Because I was a musician back in those days and played it a few times and had
All
and had, and
right.
had fun with it. It was really interesting bit of music. I really didn't understand it completely. I
Yeah,
just
it
thought it was
was.
about Jesus, right? I just thought I was into it for that. So you refer to her in the subtitle as the apostle to the apostles.
Yes.
What do you mean by that? That's not a phrase a lot of people have heard.
Right, thank you. So it is really interesting to discover that in our Western tradition, we do have um, evidence and examples, though inconsistently, of understanding her role in Jesus's ministry as apostolic. I had always heard that that was only part of the Eastern Orthodox tradition, and that they were very clear on Mary Magdalene as not a prostitute and as apostle to the apostles. And so it was really exciting to discover in the Western tradition how she has importantly also been recognized as apostle to the apostles. And some of the reasons why that happens in the history of interpretation, part of it has to do with just the flourishing of medieval mysticism in the West and the attention that was put on the importance of preaching. And so we see like the mendicant orders, especially really identifying with Mary Magdalene, seeing her encounter with Jesus in the garden in John chapter 20 as really the basis and foundation for, sending her as apostolic witness. And that goes all the way back to Irenaeus of Lyon, this reading of her role as bringing the good news to the other apostles and therefore being the apostle to the apostles. So that was my first discovery. But then the second discovery was to see that even in the Protestant tradition, even among the reformers, there is recognition of her activity in the Gospels as apostolic. And again, inconsistently, and certainly something that we have forgotten
Mm,
over time, but nonetheless there and present. And so, one of the other things that I'm doing in the book is to say that, according to Scripture's own standards for apostolicity, Mary Magdalene qualifies. So it's not just in the history of our traditions, across the traditions, but also based on what the Bible sets out for us.
Now, one of the things that people are still, I don't think they've settled on, is the idea of Magdalene itself, just the name, Mary
Yes,
Magdalene. First of all, Mary itself is a very common name, right?
that's right. Most popular name, as I understand it, for in first century Palestine for women.
Hmm.
So I really appreciated that as a Jennifer from the 80s. I
How
can
many
relate.
Jennifers are there in the 80s, right? Yeah.
Like four in every class.
Uh huh. Yeah. We go through times when names become very familiar, right? Even the name Jesus, Joshua,
Mm,
Yeshua, is a very common name at the time. So he
hmm
had to be designated something other than Yeshua. So he's designated Yeshua of Nazareth. So, and
mm.
what about Mary? What does Magdalene mean?
Yeah, so I'm using a lot of different research and biblical studies on this topic, but The reason why the name is highlighted in part is to distinguish her from other Marys,
Hmm.
but also we would notice that she is being connected to a location rather than to a man, instead of to a husband or to a
Right.
father or to a son,
Yeah.
we know her connected to this place. But also because I think in Luke chapter 8 especially, she's Mary called the Magdalene. There is a sense that there's another meaning to her name, and that in Aramaic, Migdal means tower, and so she is maybe carries this nickname of the tower. So this is a conversation going on in biblical studies right now, but what's very interesting is to see that this is how the church has read her name in the tradition, and not just in the early church, but also in the Reformation. She was called the Tower, and that was intended to signify her strength of faith, that she was known as a model of faith.
She might also have been tall. You never know.
Yes, she could have been tall.
She could have been
That's
tall, and when she put on those high heels, boy, was she really up there. Who knows? No, yeah,
good
I
point.
mean, I've heard all sorts of things about that, and a lot of it's tied to Magdala, which is a location on the west shore of the Sea of Galilee. And there's been a
Yes.
lot of research done there in the last few years, a lot of discoveries archaeologically. It's just fascinating how all these things develop. I wasn't aware that the idea of the tower had that staying power into the Reformation.
Yes, it's so interesting to discover. We're having this conversation today about how we should understand it, but we should also be aware, I think, of how the church has thought about it too. But again, inconsistently.
So there's this conflation of her and the idea of prostitution. How did that happen?
Yeah.
And well, first of all, where did that happen? How did that happen? Do you think? I mean, in all of your research as a historian.
Yes. So I really enjoyed this part of it, the curiosity of discovering, how this story fits together. And what I was able to perceive was that some of the hermeneutical approaches that were happening with reading and making sense of the Gospels was to harmonize the Gospels, which of course we can understand and
Mm-hmm.
appreciate. That is a good approach.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, what ended up happening was, in particular, what I noted was that the various stories in the gospel about a woman anointing Jesus, there are four stories, and John's gospel is the one that names Mary of Bethany, and that those stories become one story. So they are all conflated into one story rather than interpreting that maybe the other women are different women, etc. And
Mm.
so the person that I see this happening with is Augustine. He makes this move, and by linking these anointing women with Mary of Bethany, he also links Mary of Bethany then with the Luke 7 woman who is described as a sinner woman. And so that to him shows that Mary Bethany had this like other story, this other backstory to her
Hmm.
life. So first she is not looked on very well. And then the next move kind of that happens that I would say formalizes that is with Pope Gregory the Great. And he then conflates Mary of Bethany with Mary Magdalene. So basically you have the conflations of the anointings, then you have the conflation of the Marys. And so she gets absorbed, Mary Bethany gets absorbed into Mary Magdalene's story. And then because Mary Magdalene also, she is known for having seven demons, Gregory then is trying to understand how that fits into the story. And so he will describe those as seven deadly sins and interpret the sinfulness of the woman in Luke 7 as prostitution. And actually, that is the conclusion for a lot of interpreters then, even into the 21st century. So
Mm-hmm.
it's only been more recently that there have been some questions about the fact that Luke could use the Greek word for prostitute. He uses it otherwise and chooses not to use it here. So maybe her sin is not prostitution.
Yeah.
It isn't necessarily prostitution. And so that's where we get that is the 6th century and on from there, she really becomes this model of penitent prostitute who is reflecting basically the epitome of sin and is a great example of God's graciousness to choose her and select her to proclaim the good news of Christ's resurrection. And that is not going to be questioned until the Reformation. In the Reformation, they will begin to untie Mary Magdalene's story from Mary of Bethany and from the Luke 7 woman. And this is called the controversy of the three Marys.
So,
Though Luke 7 woman isn't a Mary.
yeah, isn't necessarily a Mary at all. So,
Yeah.
I mean, once the Pope says something, right?
Yeah.
And once Augustine says something, that's going to be like law forever.
For the West.
Yeah, for
Yes.
the West. Yeah, in the
It
Western
is, and
part.
because it shapes then the liturgy. You think about the feast days, you think about the liturgy. Which scripture passages are you reading on which days? Well, the church is going to place the Luke 7 reading with Mary Magdalene's feast day, and that's not even going to be changed until the modern era.
If we tell the truth now about Mary and we
Yes.
understand better her story, your book's all about this. So I don't just kind of in a summary way, what can she teach us today?
Well, I think so much. And I'll end with I think the big takeaway. First of all, I think we have to recognize that in the Gospels she is a woman who has been gripped by demons, by 7 demons, and that's actually her backstory. And Jesus is healing her from this, and he is definitively delivering her from the grip of that demonic activity. And so, however you interpret that, which, the Gospels don't reveal to us her experience of that suffering. So we don't know exactly what she experienced. We're meant to remember her as healed. And so I think we're also meant then when we see her in the garden with Jesus to see what she comes to represent in the story when she is witness to resurrection. And I know you'll love this part because I think she is revealing to us who Jesus is. And this is Jesus's exorcist who is really, king,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Kingdom come. And so we have really lost that reading of her, and it impacts how we understand the Easter morning. It impacts how we
Yeah.
understand why the women are there, what it means when she points us to Jesus. I would say that, in the early church, when they looked at Mary Magdalene, they read her. They were less focused on her and more focused on what she tells us about Christology, what she tells us about the Trinity. And I think we want to recapture that part of it, not to the detriment of knowing her or seeing her rightly, which I think is biblical, right? It's
Hmm.
reading the biblical text clearly, but then also because her whole role is really like John the Baptist to point us to Christ in all that he means. So his identity and what he is bringing to us
Mm.
through salvation. So that's one part of it. I think the other part, though, is that we have been very focused on her being this penitent prostitute sinner when her story is very different. And in fact, the Gospels want us to see her as soon as Jesus heals her, she is with him. She is focused on him. She is walking with him. Everything about her life becomes centered around him as we understand it again from the Gospels. Her resources, her time, where she goes, everything is about being with him. And so she becomes this witness. She's really like this creedal witness for us, right? Because she is there in the ministry. She is there at the cross, sees him die, sees his body put in the tomb and the tomb sealed, sees the empty tomb, and then sees the risen Christ, and that's not even all of it, right?
Wow.
So
Yeah.
there's just so much about it. And I
Mm.
think too, the financial part is really interesting because typically we probably think that a woman in the New Testament is not going to give us a lot of insight into finances and how we serve faithfully with our finances. But actually, that's also part of her story.
Man, so many takeaways here. I love the fact that you refer to her, and the church does, as the apostle to the apostles, as the one who is this initial witness to the resurrection, who
Yes.
now relates this good news, who is sent to tell this good news to the others, to the 12 and to others as well.
And we have been missing that part of it because of our reading of John 20, some of the difficulties that we have faced for the church that have obscured that part of it, I think. And so clearing some of that away, her tears, her inability to see Jesus immediately, etc., allows us to see what it means when they interact and when he sends her. There's many different parts to his sending of her that helps us to realize that in the truest sense of the term apostle, she is messenger, right? She is the one who is sent. So
Indeed. We're talking with Dr. Jennifer Powell McNutt about her book, The Mary We Forgot, What the Apostle to the Apostles Teaches the Church Today. It's a great book. I would encourage you to get it. I mean, it tells us so much about the church history, our beginnings, but also about her, just a remarkable woman who was completely, totally devoted to Jesus. Dr. Jennifer Powell McNutt, thanks for being with us today.
thank you so
on
much for
Stone
having
Chapel.
me. It was delightful.
Thanks again, Jennifer. What a great and timely book that is. We are soon welcoming a new scholar to our campus. As many of you know, we have a Visiting Fellows program at the Lanier Theological Library and Learning Center in Houston. If you're writing a book, if you're working on an article, if you're putting together a sermon series, we have a program to give you a few weeks or months staying on our property and using our 100,000 book theological library. The cost of that, $0. Why? Because it's already been paid for. If you'd like more information, you can go to our website, or you can write me an email at david.capes@lanierlibrary.org. In most cases, I'll get back with you within a week with some explanation of our program and an application. Need to fill that application, send it back. We can look at it. Make sure that you have a fully formed idea about your project and the dates that you want to come. Thanks to my wife, Kathy Capes, our audio editor, Jana Firestone, and Jessica Mauser help us produce this podcast. Thanks to Ed Stetzer, who heads up the Church Leaders Podcast Network. This podcast is part of the good work of the Lanier Theological Library and Learning Center in Houston, Texas. Until next time, I'm David Capes. Thanks for listening.